The rain in Atlanta on a Tuesday evening doesn't just fall, it heavy steps against the glass, blurring the neon signs of Peachtree Street into streaks of bleeding amber and bruised violet. Inside Laura, a Michelin-starred sanctuary of white tablecloths and hushed whispers, the air smelled of aged oak truffle, oil and old money. It was a place where people celebrated promotions, anniversaries and inheritances they didn't earn. And in the corner booth, shoved deliberately beneath the draft of the side service exit, sat Tiana Brooks. She was wearing a faded emerald cardigan that had been washed one too many times, her natural hair pulled back into a simple, practical clip. Across from her sat 7-year-old Leo, his small fingers tracing the condensation on his water glass, his eyes wide with a quiet, exhausted wonder. They weren't regulars here. They didn't belong here. They were here because it was Leo's 7th birthday, and 3 months ago Tiana had promised him that they would eat the best chocolate cake in the city. She had saved $28.40 in a rusted coffee tin under her sink for this exact night. What she didn't know, what she couldn't possibly have known, was that the waiter assigned to her station, a sharp-featured man named Julian who judged human worth by the brand of their watch, had already decided she was invisible. When Julian finally dropped their menus, he didn't look at Tiana. He didn't ask about their evening. He simply tossed the leather-bound books onto the table. Like a stack of unpaid bills, his mouth curled into a thin, dismissive line. "The kitchen closes in 20 minutes, Julian had said, his voice dripping with condescension. "If you're just ordering water and a dessert share, I must warn you, our table minimums are strictly enforced for walk-ins." Leo had shrunk back against the plush velvet bench, his lower lip trembling. "Mommy, are we bothering them?" Tiana's heart cracked right down the middle, a sharp, tearing pain that mothers know too well. The kind of pain that comes from standing between your child and a world that has already decided they don't matter. She looked up at Julian, opening her mouth to speak, to defend her son, to demand a shred of human dignity. She had no idea that 3 tables away, an elderly man in a rumpled tweed jacket, a man the entire restaurant staff treated like royalty, had just lowered his fork. That man was Arthur Sterling, and he had been watching everything. Welcome back to the channel. If you are new here, take a second to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. Here we don't just tell stories, we live inside them. We explore the quiet, overlooked moments of human existence, the places where the arrogant stumble, where the humble are tested to their absolute limits, and where kindness against all odds finds a way to demand its day in the sun. If you believe that how we treat the lowest among us defines our true soul, drop a comment below and let me know. Because the story you are about to hear, a story of a single mother, a callous waiter, and an aging investor who saw the world through an entirely different lens, is going to stay with you long after the screen goes dark. Grab a cup of coffee, settle in, and let me take you back to a rainy Tuesday night in Atlanta, where a single glance across a crowded room was about to rewrite 3 lives forever. Tiana Brooks was 28 years old, though the deep violet shadows beneath her eyes often made her look a decade older. To understand Tiana, you had to understand the rhythm of her days, a relentless, unbroken march of sacrifice. Every morning at 4:30 a.m., while the rest of the city was still wrapped in blankets, Tiana's alarm would softly chime. She wouldn't hit snooze. Couldn't afford to. She would slip out of her narrow bed in their cramped 2-bedroom apartment off Cleveland Avenue, careful not to wake Leo. By 5:15 a.m. she was standing at the industrial folding tables of Sweetbread's bakery, flour dusting her apron as she kneaded hundreds of pounds of dough before the sun crested the horizon. She worked until 1 p.m. lifting heavy sacks of sugar, breathing in the sweet, warm steam of ovens and smiling politely at customers who didn't notice the tremor in her wrists. At 1:30 p.m. she raced across town to her second job, data entry at a mid-sized logistics firm, where she sat in a windowless cubicle staring at endless spreadsheets until 6 p.m. Then came the evening rush, picking up Leo from after-school care, helping him with spelling words over a dinner of beans and rice, checking homework, folding laundry, and finally falling into bed around Midnight only to wake up 4 hours later and do it all over again. She didn't do it for praise. She did it because 4 years ago when Leo was 3, his father walked out the door with their savings account and a goodbye note left on the toaster. Tiana had been left with nothing. No college degree, no safety net, and a toddler who needed shoes that actually fit. She never asked for handouts. She never learned how to play the victim. Instead, she poured every ounce of her soul into ensuring that Leo grew up believing the world was full of magic, even when her own pockets were entirely empty. Which brought them to Laura. For months, Leo had seen the gleaming glass storefront whenever they rode the bus past downtown. He had pointed out the twinkling lights and whispered, "Mommy, that looks like a castle. Do princes live there?" Tiana had made a silent vow then and there. "My son is going to sit in that castle even if it costs me my last grocery bill." She had budgeted meticulously. The children's menu wasn't cheap, but she had calculated the tax, the tip, and the exact cost of the restaurant's famous molten chocolate lava cake. $13. To Tiana, $13 was 2 hours of standing on aching feet at the bakery. But for Leo's 7th birthday, it was worth every single ache. When they walked through the heavy glass doors of Laura, the blast of warm air and the symphony of silverware clinking against bone china made Leo freeze. He looked down at his scuffed sneakers, suddenly self-conscious. "It's okay, buddy," Tiana had whispered, squeezing his small hand. "Hold your head up. You're the birthday boy." They had made reservations online 3 weeks prior under the name Brooks. But when the hostess checked her tablet, a flicker of polite annoyance crossed her face. "Ah yes. Table 12, the hostess said, her eyes sweeping over Tiana's sensible coat and scuffed boots. "Right this way." Table 12 wasn't a table. It was a punishment. It was wedged directly beside the swinging double doors that led to the kitchen. Every time a waiter rushed out with trays of seared duck or rack of lamb, the door would blast open, sending a gust of cold air and the frantic shouting of line cooks over their shoulders. Tiana didn't complain. She sat down, adjusted Leo's napkin across his lap, and smiled brightly. "Look at this place, Leo. We're fancy tonight." That was when Julian arrived. Julian Vance. No relation to the wealthy Vancess of Buckhead, though he liked to let people assume there was, had worked at Laura for 4 years. He viewed himself less as a server and more as a curator of the elite. In Julian's mind, restaurant like Laura was a theater and peasants didn't belong in the front rows. He approached table 12 with a posture of practiced disdain. He didn't introduce himself. He didn't offer a pleasantry. "Good evening." Or afternoon technically, since you're seated during our early twilight shift, Julian said, his eyes scanning the ceiling rather than looking. "Tiana, what can I get started for you? Keep in mind table minimum is $50 per party during peak dining hours." Tiana blinked, her smile faltering for a fraction of a second. The online booking portal had said nothing about a table minimum. "Oh," Tiana said softly. We were hoping to order a couple of appetizers to share and the chocolate cake for his birthday." Julian let out a sharp, incredulous breath through his nose. "Appetizers and a single dessert. Ma'am, this is Laura. We don't operate as a neighborhood bakery. If you're only looking for sweets, there is a Dunkin' Donuts 3 blocks down on Marietta Street." The words weren't just rude. They were designed to humiliate. They were spoken loudly enough for the tables nearby to hear. A couple dining at table 10. A man in a crisp charcoal suit and a woman draped in pearls, suppressed snickers behind their wine glasses. Leo's head dropped. A single tear rolled down his cheek and hit the white tablecloth, forming a tiny dark circle on the pristine linen. "Mommy, I'm not hungry anymore. Can we go home?" Something inside Tiana, something quiet, fierce, and unbreakable, snapped. He didn't yell. She didn't cause a scene. Instead, Tiana slowly placed her hands flat on the table, her spine straightening until she looked every bit as tall as the man standing above her. She looked Julian dead in the eye, not with anger but with a cold, piercing clarity that made the waiter momentarily forget his script. "My son is 7 years old today," Tiana said, her voice dropping to a low, steady register that carried an uncanny authority. He has dreamed of having his birthday cake in this restaurant for months. I am a paying customer. I have a reservation. And you are going to treat us with the basic human respect that this establishment purports to provide, or I will speak to the general manager. Before my water glass is even empty. Julian bristled, his face flushing with offended vanity. How dare a woman in a faded cardigan talk back to him? Listen to me, sweetheart, Julian sneered, leaning down slightly, lowering his voice into a venomous hiss. People like you don't belong here. You're taking up space that could be occupied by people who actually tip. So you can either order a proper meal right now, or you can take your little boy and get out before I call security to help you find the exit. Before Tiana could draw breath to answer, a silver fork dropped against a porcelain plate 3 tables away. It wasn't a loud sound, but in the hushed elegance of Laura, it cut through the room like a gunshot. Julian flinched, immediately snapping his head toward table 4. His professional mask slapped back onto his face instantly, his posture transforming from predatory arrogance to trembling subservience. Because table 4 belonged to Arthur Sterling. Arthur Sterling was 74 years old, though he moved with the unhurried, terrifying certainty of a man who owned the ground he walked on. To the staff at Laura, Arthur was a living legend. He wasn't just a regular, he was the primary venture capitalist who had rescued the restaurant group from bankruptcy 3 years prior. He owned 51% of the holding company, held a permanent seat on the board, and dined in the corner booth every Tuesday night like clockwork. Yet, unlike the flashy tech executives and old money socialites who frequented the establishment, Arthur dressed like a retired high school history teacher. He wore worn tweed jackets with leather patches on the elbows, drove a 10-year-old Ford truck, and carried a battered leather notepad filled with hand-drawn architectural sketches. He was notoriously quiet. He tipped 50% in cash, never complained about the food, and treated the dishwashers with the exact same courteous warmth he extended to the head chef. And right now, Arthur Sterling was staring directly at Julian with a gaze so cold and flat it could freeze liquid nitrogen. Julian abandoned Tiana's table mid-sentence, scurrying over to table 4 with a breathless, panicked smile. Mr. Sterling. Good evening, sir, Julian babbled, grabbing the water pitcher with shaking hands. I am so terribly sorry if the noise from that disturbance over there bothered you. We were just handling a policy misunderstanding with some walk-in guests. Shall I bring out your usual ribeye? The chef prepared it rare, exactly how you like it. Arthur didn't look at the water pitcher. He didn't look at Julian's trembling hands. He slowly laid his cloth napkin on the table, leaned back against his chair, and crossed his arms over his tweed vest. Julian, Arthur said. His voice wasn't raised. It was soft, gravelly, and entirely devoid of warmth. Yes, Mr. Sterling? Anything at all, just name it. How long have you worked here? Julian blinked, thrown off balance by the question. 4 years, sir. Head 4. Captain since last spring. 4 years, Arthur repeated slowly, nodding to himself. In 4 years I have watched you greet senators with a bow, millionaire developers with a handshake, and tourists with a smile. But tonight I watched you look at a mother and her child as if they were garbage swept in off the street. Julian's face drained of color. Sir, with all due respect, they don't meet the financial profile of... Shut up, Julian, Arthur interrupted gently. There was no anger in his tone, which made it infinitely more terrifying. Do you know what my father did for a living, Julian? I wouldn't presume, sir. He was a janitor at a railway station in Savannah, Georgia, Arthur said, his eyes glazing over with a distant, painful memory. Every year on my birthday, my mother would save up for weeks to take me to a diner downtown. We couldn't afford much, just a plate of French fries and a shared milkshake. But the waitress, a kind woman named Mrs. Gable, always treated us like we were sitting at the captain's table. She put a candle in a greasy donut and sang Happy Birthday so loud the whole diner clapped. Arthur leaned forward, resting his weathered forearms on the white tablecloth. That kindness didn't cost Mrs. Gable a single dime, Arthur continued, his voice hardening. But it gave a little boy from the wrong side of town the belief that he belonged in this world. Taught me that a person's dignity isn't tied to their wallet. And yet, standing right here in a jacket that cost more than my father earned in a month, I watched you try to steal that exact belief from a little boy on his birthday. By this point, the entire dining room had gone dead silent. Conversations had ground to a halt. Heads were turned. The manager, a frantic Italian man named Marco, came sprinting out of the back office, sensing disaster. "Mr. Sterling, is everything all right? Is there a problem with the meal?" Marco asked, bowing frantically. "There is a cancer in this dining room, Marco," Arthur said, standing up slowly. He picked up his cane, leaned on it for support, and pointed a gnarled finger directly at Julian. "And his name is Julian. Mr. Sterling, please." Julian choked out, his voice cracking with panic. "You can't. I have a mortgage. I've been here 4 years." "You have been here too long," Arthur corrected coldly. He turned his attention away from the trembling waiter and looked across the room. His eyes locked onto table 12. To Tiana's utter astonishment, the old man in the tweed jacket picked up his cane, walked steadily across the polished hardwood floor, and stopped right beside her chair. Leo clutched his mother's sleeve, wide-eyed. Tiana looked up, her jaw tight, bracing herself for whatever insult this wealthy patron was about to hurl. Instead, Arthur Sterling took off his tweed cap, bowed his head slightly, and smiled a smile that reached all the way to his eyes. "Happy 7th birthday, young man," Arthur said warmly to Leo. Then he turned his gaze to Tiana. "Forgive me for intruding, madam, but would you and your son honor an old man by allowing me to join your table? I find myself terribly lonely tonight, and I happen to know for a fact that the chocolate cake here is far too large for just one person." The silence in Laura was absolute. You could hear the hum of the refrigeration units in the back kitchen. Tiana stared up at the old man, her mind racing. She saw the expensive suit, jacket, the refined posture, the unmistakable aura of power. Her immediate instinct was defense, the conditioned reflex of a single mother who expected the other shoe to drop, who expected humiliation disguised as charity. "Sir, we appreciate the kind offer," Tiana said, her voice cautious, her chin held high, "but we were just finishing up and heading out." "Please," Arthur said softly, his eyes filled with a profound quiet understanding that disarmed her instantly. "Don't punish the chocolate cake on my account. And please call me Arthur." Leo peeked out from behind Tiana's arm, his curiosity winning over his fear. "Are you really going to eat cake with us?" "Only if you promise to share," Arthur chuckled, pulling out the velvet chair opposite them and seating himself with practiced ease. Marco, the general manager, hovered nervously nearby, sweat beading on his forehead. "Mr. Sterling, let me upgrade your table immediately. You have the private VIP parlor open." "No, Marco," Arthur said without looking up, smoothing his napkin across his lap. "Table 12 is fine. In fact, table 12 has the best view in the house. It reminds me where I came from." Arthur signaled to a young busboy, a terrified 19-year-old college student named Marcus, who was usually ignored by the senior waitstaff. "Marcus, my boy, bring us 3 menus. And tell the pastry chef to pack up 2 whole chocolate cakes, 1 for the table and 1 for this young man to take home to his mother. And bring us a bottle of your finest sparkling apple cider." Marcus beamed, his chest swelling with pride. "Right away, Mr. Sterling." As Marcus scurried off, Julian stood frozen near the service station, pale and trembling. Marco muttered something furiously to Julian under his breath, handing him his ledger and pointing toward the exit. Julian ripped off his apron, dropped it onto the floor, and bolted out the side door into the rainy Atlanta night, never to return. At table 12, the atmosphere shifted completely. The cold, sterile tension of the Michelin-star dining room melted away, replaced by the warmth of genuine human connection. Arthur leaned his elbows on the table, looking at Tiana with steady, searching eyes. "You have fire in you, young lady. I like that. Most people in your position would have cowered or cried. You stood your ground." Tiana let out a shaky sigh, the adrenaline slowly leaving her veins. "When you've spent years fighting just to keep the lights on, Mr. Sterling, you run out of tears. You only have fight left. What do you do, Tiana?" Arthur asked, noting her name from the reservation slip. Marco had dropped on the table earlier. If you don't mind an old man asking. I bake by day and crunch numbers by night, Tiana replied, a self-deprecating smile touching her lips. And on weekends I try to figure out how to stretch 24 hours into 30. I'm an architectural designer by training, graduated top of my class at Georgia Tech. But life happened. The market crashed right when I was starting out, personal things fell apart, and suddenly you're taking whatever job keeps health insurance active and groceries in the fridge. Arthur's eyebrows arched. Georgia Tech architectural design? That's no small feat. What kind of design? Sustainable urban spaces, Tiana said, her eyes suddenly lighting up with the passion that had fueled her college years. Community-centered housing. Buildings that aren't just concrete boxes to warehouse people but spaces that breathe. Parks integrated into multifamily units, rooftop gardens for low-income families to grow their own food. Everyone talks about urban renewal, but they always build luxury condos that displace the very people who built the city. For the next 20 minutes, Tiana forgot where she was. He talked about her designs, sketching rough floor plans on the back of a paper napkin with a borrowed pen. Leo watched his mother with awe, beaming with pride. And Arthur Sterling listened. Not the fake condescending listening Julian had done, but deep, rapt attention. He asked probing questions about zoning laws, material costs, and structural integrity. When Marcus brought out the chocolate cake, a towering masterpiece of rich, dark ganache and spun sugar, Leo dug in with joyous abandonment, chocolate smudged across his nose. Best birthday ever, Leo declared through a mouthful of cake, making Arthur throw his head back and laugh, a deep booming laugh that echoed through the restaurant. When the meal concluded, Tiana reached firmly into her worn leather purse, pulled out her $28.40 and laid it neatly on the table. Arthur, thank you for the wonderful company and the cake, Tiana said firmly. This covers our share. Arthur looked at the small pile of crumpled bills and coins. He didn't mock it. He didn't wave it away with condescension. Instead, he reached into his tweed pocket, pulled out a thick leather-bound fountain pen and slid a blank business card across the table. Tiana, Arthur said softly, his voice carrying the weight of absolute authority. I don't hand this card out to many people. In fact, the last time I gave this number to someone was 10 years ago. Call me on Thursday morning at 9 o'clock. Don't go to the bakery. Don't sit in a cubicle doing data entry. Come to my office on Peachtree Road. Tiana looked down at the card. It simply read, Arthur Sterling, Managing Director, Sterling Enterprises. No phone number, just a direct extension and a private email address. Why? Tiana asked, her voice barely a whisper. Because, my dear, Arthur said, standing up and leaning on his cane, for 3 years, my firm has been looking for a visionary lead architect to spearhead our new community revitalization project in South Atlanta, a multi-million-dollar development focused entirely on sustainable low-income housing. Arthur paused, placing a gentle, weathered hand over her knuckles. We were looking for an expensive corporate firm from New York, Arthur whispered with a wink. But I think a mother who knows how to stretch $28 into a feast is far more qualified to build homes for people who actually need them. The rain had stopped by the time Tiana and Leo stepped out of Laura. The Atlanta skyline gleamed against the wet pavement like a field of scattered diamonds. Tiana clutched the business card in her pocket like it was made of solid gold. Her heart was hammering against her ribs, a wild, disbelieving rhythm. Could it really be true? Was this the turning point? Was the grueling, endless grind of sleepless nights and bruised feet finally about to yield something beautiful? She didn't know it yet, but the true test of her character, and the ultimate twist of the evening, was waiting for her just 2 blocks away at the MARTA transit station. As they walked briskly toward the subway entrance, holding hands and laughing about the chocolate smeared on Leo's face, a sharp, ragged voice cut through the damp night air. Hey, lady in the green coat. Tiana turned. Huddled beneath the concrete overhang of the subway stairs, shivering violently in a sodden, cheap hoodie, was Julian, the arrogant, immaculate floor captain of Laura was gone. In his place was a broken, terrified young man. His hair was plastered to his forehead, his designer shirt stained with mud from where he had evidently slipped on the slick pavement, and his eyes were wide with panic. Tiana froze, pulling Leo slightly behind her. Julian scrambled to his feet, holding up his hands defensively. Please don't call the police. I'm not going to bother you. Tiana stared at him, her initial anger instantly giving way to a profound, unsettling shock. Julian, what happened to you? Julian let out a bitter, choked laugh that sounded half like a sob. What happened? You're looking at a ghost. Marco fired me the second Mr. Sterling walked back to his table. Not only did he fire me, but he called the regional district manager. Within an hour, my name was blacklisted across every high-end hospitality group in the state of Georgia. Julian wiped a trembling hand across his face, smearing rainwater and dirt. I lost my apartment 3 hours ago, Julian whispered, his voice cracking. Why? Landlord evicted me because I couldn't pay the back rent without my tips. All my savings were tied up in a car lease I can't afford. I'm ruined, Tiana. 1 hour of arrogance and my entire life is ashes. He looked down at the concrete, his shoulders shaking. Tiana stood in silence. The ghosts of her own past rose up, the memory of Marcus, telling her she was nothing, the terror of sleeping in her car, the crushing weight of utter helplessness. She had every reason in the world to walk away. She could look at him with disdain, throw his own words back in his face. People like you don't belong here, and let him reap the exact harvest he had sown. Justice, after all, was supposed to look like retribution. Leo tugged on Tiana's sleeve, looking up at her with big, innocent eyes. Mommy, the man is crying. Is he cold? Tiana looked down at her son. Then she looked back at Julian. She remembered what Arthur Sterling had said in the restaurant. That kindness doesn't cost a dime, and that dignity isn't tied to a wallet. He realized in that defining second that if she walked away with hatred in her heart, she would be no different than the man who had tried to humiliate her under those crystal chandeliers. Tiana reached into her purse. She didn't pull out the business card. Instead, she pulled out her worn leather wallet. Inside sat the remaining $22 of her hard-earned grocery money meant for eggs, milk, and bread for the rest of the week. She pulled out a $20 bill, walked forward, and pressed it firmly into Julian's freezing, calloused palm. Julian gasped, looking down at the bill, then up at Tiana in sheer disbelief. Tiana, I insulted you. I tried to throw you out. Why are you doing this? Because you're hungry and you're cold, Tiana said simply, her voice steady and clear. And no matter how ugly people are to you, Julian, you never stop being a human being. The diner down the street is still open. Go get a hot meal. And tomorrow morning, start over. Do better. Julian stared at the $20 bill, his lower lip trembling violently. The tough, arrogant facade dissolved entirely, and the 28-year-old waiter sank to his knees on the wet concrete, burying his face in his hands and weeping, with the raw, cleansing agony of a man who had finally hit rock bottom and found grace waiting for him in the dirt. 3 years later, the skyline of South Atlanta looked entirely different. Where abandoned warehouses and blighted lots once stood, Sterling Community Gardens now thrived, a breathtaking, sustainable residential complex featuring rooftop solar arrays, community gardens, and safe, beautiful homes for working-class families. And at the center of it all stood the lead architectural firm, Brooks and Sterling Design. Tiana Brooks no longer wore a faded green cardigan. She wore tailored blazers and carried the blueprints of a city transformed. Her dream hadn't just come true, it had expanded to lift hundreds of families out of poverty alongside her. Leo was now a happy, thriving 10-year-old soccer player who still loved chocolate cake more than anything in the world. Arthur Sterling had retired from day-to-day investing, handing the reins of his foundation over to Tiana, serving proudly as a grandfather figure to Leo and a lifelong champion of human dignity. And Julian didn't leave Atlanta. With Tiana's quiet recommendation and a second chance he hadn't deserved, he took an entry-level job at a local community soup kitchen. He worked 12-hour shifts washing dishes, mopping floors, and greeting every single person who walked through the door, whether they wore a tailored suit or a tattered hoodie, with absolute unwavering respect. He never forgot the $20 bill that saved his soul on a rainy MARTA platform. Some stories end with revenge. Some stories end with the wicked being cast down into permanent ruin. But the most unforgettable stories, the ones that truly change us, remind us of a higher truth. True power isn't found in the size of your bank account, the exclusivity of your restaurant, or the title on your business card. True power is found in the quiet, terrifying grace of showing mercy to the exact person who tried to break